the problem with the doctrine of multiculturalism, which you invented here in Canada and which has spread, unfortunately, to other places, is that it does encourage migrants to stay separate from the country that they've entered, even though every migrant comes voluntarily.
Yeah.
And presumably comes not to change their new country, but to join their new country. And so it's my fundamental position that we do no one any favours. We don't do the existing population, we don't do the new migrants any favours if we try to dilute the Anglo-Celtic core culture and water down the fundamentally Judeo-Christian ethos, which have made our countries and which have made them so attractive.
Welcome to this special edition of Inside Policy Talks, the podcast of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm Kevin Vong, a senior fellow here at MLI. Now, in recent weeks, the rapid pace of global events has mounted a growing stress test on the character and resilience of the West. We've had talk of the rules-based order breaking down, threats about tariffs and annexation of sovereign nations, new strategic partnerships for Canada outside the Western Alliance, and events that seem to expose an increasingly confused moral compass among some Western elites, with much of the political media class slow to call out the dangers of Islamic extremism. Despite an uprising in Iran and the horrific events at Bondi Beach in Australia, so far, Canada has avoided a Bondi Beach-style attack on our home soil. But leading experts have predicted that if rising extremism is left unchecked, Canada will fall victim to similar horrors. Certainly, during and after my time as a member of Parliament, I've seen firsthand that adversaries who do not share our Western values are becoming more brazen with their activities here in Canada, in my case, having been targeted by the Chinese Communist regime. Now, to unpack this web of interconnected challenges staring down the West, we're joined by someone who has not shied away from speaking with moral clarity on these issues, particularly when it comes to the Bondi Beach attack, which occurred in his home country. The Right Honourable Tony Abbott served as Australia's 28th Prime Minister from 2013 to 2015. He also spent over 25 years as a member of Australia's Parliament. He's in Canada this week, and we are delighted and honoured to have him join us today at the MLI office in Ottawa. Now, before we begin, please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps us to reach more people with these ideas. The Right Honourable Tony Abbott, welcome to this podcast.
Kevin, it's wonderful to be with you.
We're very lucky to have you spend a little bit of time with us. And I really want to start with your perspective. When you look at the events that you see unfolding right now around the world, how would you characterize the big picture of the current global tensions we face and the way the West in particular seems to be navigating this?
Well, Kevin, the West is under absolutely unprecedented challenge. It's typically said that strategically the circumstances haven't been this bad since the late 1930s, and I think that's right. That's not to say that we are about to go into another global conflict, but certainly the challenge to the sorts of values that people in countries like ours have taken for granted has never been more severe in our lifetimes. We've got a militarist dictatorship in Moscow. We've got an apocalyptic Islamist dictatorship in Tehran, which, though weakened, still wants to see a global caliphate. And of course, as you alluded to earlier, we've got a communist dictatorship in Beijing, which is bent on world domination. I think the problem in countries like ours is that we complacently assume that the leaders of the challenger countries really are bluffing, that deep down They don't really want to dominate Europe or dominate East Asia. Really deep down, they just want to stay in office and do the sorts of things that politicians in our countries do, deliver better schools, better hospitals, lower taxes, better roads, etc. Wrong. If you don't have to face a democratic election, your preoccupation is not the concerns of voters and citizens. Your preoccupation tends to be your conception of national destiny. And Putin wants to recreate the Russia of Peter the Great.
Yes.
The mullahs in Tehran are desperate to see a global caliphate, and they don't really care how many people die in the attempt to bring that about. And as Xi Jinping and his commissars keep telling us, it is China's historic destiny to be the world's #1 power by 2049, the centenary of the communist takeover. And what that means is, as quickly as possible, taking Taiwan and establishing, if you like, a clear Chinese ascendancy over its near abroad. And what people in Australia don't understand is that a world dominated by China will be so different from a world that has been shaped by the long Anglo-American ascendancy, the world which until quite recently was more free, more fair, more rich and more safe than at any time in history. But since the pandemic, things have been sliding downhill frighteningly fast.
And as things are sliding downhill, that's where now you're getting this talk of, well, with China's ascendancy, is there this new world order? I mean, those are, three words that have been echoed by our Prime Minister here in Canada. And so I'm curious for your perspective, would you agree with that assessment as it's been suggested? Particularly, in this era now where middle powers like Canada and Australia are clearly under pressure.
Well, the so-called liberal rules-based order is really just code for a world dominated by the Anglo-American mindset, and, if you like, policed by Anglo-American power. Yes, in a sense, countries like Canada and Australia are middle powers, but frankly, we're both part of the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
We're both part of the Western Alliance. Canada is a founding member of NATO. Australia is a strong partner of NATO.
Five Eyes.
Canada and Australia were both initial strong participants in 2 world wars. This idea that Australia or Canada can or should stand apart from our fellow Western powers, particularly from the leading Anglosphere power, the United States, I just think is wrong. I mean, the point I make, Kevin, is that whatever occasional divergences in short-term interests our countries might have, whatever occasional difficulties we might have with the individual who might be leading one of our countries, there is a fundamental community of interests and values. There is a long shared history between all the leading Anglosphere countries. I regard us as family, essentially.
Yeah.
When Stephen Harper came to Australia to address our Parliament a few years back, he called us strategic cousins. Well, I would go a lot further than that. I would say that we are national family. I think that no Australian feels like a foreigner in Canada. No Briton feels like a foreigner in Australia. Yeah, sure, you can go to parts of America and think this is a bit unusual. But look, there's a fundamental community and solidarity between the main English-speaking countries, and this idea that we should rush off on our own seeking new partnerships with people with whom we've got very little in common, either values, interests or history, I think it's a big mistake. And sure, Prime Minister Carney won applause from the Davos crowd with his speech, but the easiest thing in the world is to take pot shots at an abrasive US president. If you want cheap applause, be critical of Donald Trump. But he couldn't actually bring himself to name Donald Trump, although there was heavy inferences that Donald Trump was the real villain of the speech.
So, you're suggesting that instead of trying to replace the rules-based international order, Canada and Australia should be looking to maintain it and defend it.
Exactly right. And if there is, shall we say, some difficulties with the current US president, I think we need to do two things. First, we need to remember that America is not any particular president. Any particular president might, in a sense, govern the country, but he doesn't own the country.
Correct.
And he doesn't embody the country. So, America is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not America. But if you do have a difficulty, rather than rush off and declare a strategic partnership with the commissars in Beijing, a far more sensible thing would be to build on the other Anglosphere bonds. I've long thought that there is some potential for, if you like, a Kanzak relationship where Britain, Canada, Australia and New Zealand deepen their own bonds, deepen their military, their economic, their institutional links, building on the long history, building on the instinctive solidarity, which I think would give us collectively more weight in Washington should that be needed.
Yeah, I mean, essentially Five Eyes minus the US, and what do we have in common? That Commonwealth heritage.
Exactly right.
Let's take a closer look to some of the events that were in your neck of the woods that's really shaping our current global environment. And I want to start with, the event that I think, of course, happened in your home country, but is of equal concern for us in the West.
Yeah.
Less than 2 months ago, this horrific terrorist attack at Bondi Beach saw Jews directly targeted on Hanukkah by 2 Islamic extremist gunmen. 15 people were killed, including a 10-year-old, Matilda. What sort of warning should these events offer to all Western countries about rising extremism?
Thank you for asking me about this atrocity. Look, Kevin, no Australian ever thought something like this could happen in our country because we have liked to think of ourselves as the world's most successful multicultural nation. Now, we certainly are, we have been a very successful immigrant society, but it's one thing to be a successful immigrant society, and it's another thing to encourage newcomers to maintain a kind of cultural separatism. And the problem with the doctrine of multiculturalism, which you invented here in Canada and which has spread, unfortunately, to other places, is that it does implicitly and in its harder forms explicitly encourage migrants to stay separate from the country that they've entered, even though every migrant comes voluntarily and presumably comes not to change their new country, but to join their new country. And so it's my fundamental position that we do no one any favours. We don't do the existing population, we don't do the new migrants any favours if we try to dilute the Anglo-Celtic core culture and water down the fundamentally Judeo-Christian ethos which have made our countries and which have made them so attractive. And what's happened in Australia over the last couple of decades is that we have seen the growth of militant Islam concentrated amongst migrant communities. Now, I'm not saying that Muslims living in Australia are bad people at all. Lots of wonderful Australians happen to be Muslim. But if you believe in a caliphate, if you believe in Sharia law, Australia's not the place for you. Every person who becomes an Australian citizen is required to take an oath to Australia and its people, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey. Now, plainly, that's inconsistent with belief in a caliphate. That's inconsistent with belief in Sharia law, and it's particularly inconsistent with the sort of rampant Jew hatred on which so many people living in the Middle East have been raised. Now, we should have woken up to the problem when, within 48 hours of the October 7 atrocity, an ugly mob gathered on the forecourt of the Sydney Opera House and started screaming the most despicable slogans, F the Jews.
I remember.
What sounded very much like gas the Jews. And I regret to say that New South Wales Police, who frankly should have stopped this march, they actually facilitated it. And the only person who was arrested that day was someone carrying a Star of David flag. Now, I'm afraid from then on, we had Islamic preachers supposedly quoting scripture, calling on death to the Jews. We had Muslim authority figures in Australia celebrating what had happened on October the 7th, including the raping of women, the killing of children, the burning alive of families. We had almost weekly marches in favour of Hamas, people screaming death, death to the IDF, globalise the Intifada. Now, these phrases, which are incitement to violence, should have been prosecuted. Hate preachers should have been deported, and frankly, these hate marches should have been banned, because if toxic ideas are allowed to take hold and run rampant, sooner or later toxic actions follow.
Correct.
So in the aftermath of October 7 and the October 9 outrage at the Opera House, we had extensive vandalism of Jewish property. Then we had the fire bombings of synagogues. And then, of course, ultimately, the massacre at Bondi Beach. Now, all of this should have been acted against much earlier. The problem was that the current government treated Jew hatred as a political problem to be managed rather than as a moral evil to be eradicated. Now, obviously, December the 14th has been a terrible wake-up call. I'm still not sure the government has got the message. There has been one person prosecuted under hate speech laws since the December 14 massacre, and that person was a neo-Nazi who was making pretty atrocious statements. But this is a government which is much readier to prosecute right-wing extremists and right-wing Jew hatred than it is to prosecute left-wing extremists or Islamist Jew hatred. And I've got to say, we can't have two-tier policing.
No.
We can't have double standards in the law. If something is wrong and illegal, well, it's wrong and illegal for everyone, not just for the more politically unfashionable groups.
You know, it's unfortunate, but I guess perhaps relieving in a sad way that when you were describing the incidents happening in Australia, that could have just as easily been Canada. We've had a lot of the same incidents, and you know, I feel like a point that I want to reiterate for our listeners is what you were saying a little bit earlier around the people that choose to come to our countries, and this is in this, well, the script or anything, you'll forgive me, but there's a reason they came to our countries. And like you said, foundationally, it is the freedom, human rights, and the very values that we hold so sacred and I would argue have enabled the prosperity that we've had for so long. And I say that as the son of refugees. My parents are part of the Chinese diaspora in Vietnam. They were boat people. Australia welcomed many boat people, just like Canada did. And my parents were persecuted following the end of the war by communists. And they spent 2 years in a refugee camp waiting for their turn, not abusing the asylum claimant process and abusing, exploiting the compassion of Australians and Canadians. And when they came here, they very intentionally embraced the culture and values of their new home.
Completely correct, Kevin. And until very recently, migrants to Australia were extremely grateful to be there.
Yeah.
Were very eager to learn English as quickly as they could and to fit in as fast as they could.
That's right.
And through work, through sport, through joining community organisations, including political parties, the vast majority of Australia's migrants have been great success stories and turned out to be really wonderful Australians. And nothing gives me more pleasure than to see those of my fellow Australians who are not of Anglo-Celtic ethnicity, nevertheless speaking English with a broad Australian accent and fully participating in our national life, whether that's playing sport for our national team, whether it's representing a constituency in Parliament, whether it's being, a senior manager in a large business, whatever it might be. That is simply wonderful.
Yeah.
The trouble is that some have, if you like, become professional ethnics, if you like, and instead of, I suppose, being grateful for the new life that countries like Australia give people, they've had, if you like, a professional interest in grievance mongering and victimhood
that's right.
maintenance. And I regret to say that this has been particularly the case amongst some of our Muslim communities, and it's noteworthy that the Imams Council has been very quick to accuse all and sundry of Islamophobia in the wake of the Bondi massacre and said, Islam had nothing to do with it. Well, as far as the perpetrators are concerned, Islam had everything to do with it. I mean, they had a couple of Islamic State flags which they put on display at the beginning of this atrocity. Now, okay, you can say that's a perversion of Islam, but it's incumbent upon any serious Islamic leader to keep telling his faithful, you have got to accept democracy.
Correct.
You have got to accept religious pluralism. You have got to accept the rights of women. You have got to accept that this is a country where no one gets special rights from God. Everyone gets equal rights from God, whether they're Muslim or not.
And these are foundational values that I would argue is why multiculturalism initially worked in both our countries, because different cultures came around the world, but what binds us together were these foundational values.
And given that in almost none of the Western countries can we have, if you like, a religious or an ethnic patriotism, we need a very strong civic patriotism.
Correct.
And this is where, at its best, the United States has always been so good. I mean, e pluribus unum has always been, I think, a wonderful guiding principle, if you like, for for immigrant societies.
Now, in Canada, we've had, fortunately, no Bondi Beach sort of attacks, but we've had a few near misses. And I actually raised these directly in the House during my time while I was in Parliament. There was a father-son duo who were arrested before they could execute a similar mass casualty attack in Toronto, but stopped before they could. We had 2 other foreign nationals here under the guise of being students, allegedly. One was arrested in Quebec near the US border before he could execute an attack targeting Jews in New York City to commemorate that horrific October 7th massacre. There was another who was charged for allegedly making and possessing improvised explosive devices in Niagara Falls. And yet it seems to be an uphill battle to get some of my fellow Canadians to take this threat seriously. So, Tony, why is there such resistance in the Anglosphere and the West more broadly to address this problem head on?
Very good question, Kevin. I think there's a couple of factors. I suppose none of us want to believe that our fellow human beings, particularly people who have, at least for a time, been living amongst us, can be so full of hatred that they would kill people on such a basis. And I guess the other thing is that no one wants to be accused of racism or Islamophobia or whatever. And they worry that if they are to take a strong stance against this, well, they may be guilty of this. Now, honestly, the foes of the West use the West's virtues and good nature against it. Our problem is, in a tolerant society, how do we deal with the intolerant?
Correct. And tolerating the intolerant is not the path forward.
No. And this idea that, everything goes is just wrong. And we can accept that people differ on all sorts of things. They can differ politically. They can differ on their economic priorities. They can have their, sexuality and gender issues. But on something as fundamental as the right of every human being to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, well, I'm afraid there can be no dissent on that.
So what is the solution then? How do we get more people to acknowledge this?
Well, again, Kevin, it's leadership. I mean, we need more people in positions of authority who are prepared to stand up for what I think is increasingly rare common sense. We just have to be quite clear about what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. We've got to be quite clear about our expectations of people, whether they're born here or whether they've come here. And again, Jew hatred is ugly when it's simply expressed privately. I think it should be prosecuted if it's expressed publicly. And the reason why it needs to be combated at every level is because any form of hatred that becomes widely felt and expressed can readily lead, almost inevitably will lead, to the kind of horrors that we saw.
Of course, it's absolutely corrosive. Are there any leaders, whether in Australia or world leaders, who you'd point to who are particularly effective at doing this?
Well, the current Australian government hasn't been very effective. Let's hope they can lift their game after what happened on December the 14th. I don't believe the current British government has been very effective. And I have no reason to be that confident about the Canadian government, given, I suppose, some of your own observations, Kevin. Look, eventually the appeasers of the 1930s became the war fighters of the 1940s.
Yeah.
So let's hope the kind of cultural appeasers of the early 2000s become the cultural believers of these times. Because let's face it, while Western culture is not without its flaws, Western civilization is not perfect. It's the least imperfect that we've yet devised.
Yes.
And at the heart of the Western idea has been this acceptance that we aren't perfect, this quest to be better, and this readiness to adopt and adapt better ideas from others where we come across them. Now, I thought this great characteristic of our civilization would be what made ours more lasting than all previous civilizations. Yet in recent times, that healthy self-doubt has metastasized into a kind of cultural self-loathing.
Yeah.
And once a people, a culture, a civilization no longer have faith in themselves, then they're swiftly on the road to ruin.
Correct.
And that's the danger which we face right now.
And our adversaries are exacerbating it further, leveraging AI and different technologies to feed into that self-loathing.
Correct.
One of which is, the Chinese Communist Party and that regime. It's a threat that Canadians don't particularly fully appreciate, and especially too, I think now that we have what they are hearing from our Prime Minister, China is a strategic partner.
Look, Australia, under my government, full disclosure, we found ourselves suddenly being described as a comprehensive strategic partner of China.
Yeah.
Now, I hasten to add, this was back in 2014 when Xi Jinping was more of a panda than a grizzly bear, so to speak. And I think it was still possible to think that China was on a liberalising path back then. In fact, when Xi Jinping came to Canberra in 2014, his speech to the Australian Parliament, the official Chinese version, English version of Xi Jinping's speech was that China would be, quote, fully democratic by mid-century.
Yes.
Now, sure, they tend to mean different things by democracy than we do, but the fact that his English interpreters, his official English interpreters, put it that way, I thought said something about the desire of the Chinese leadership only a decade ago to put its best face forward, its smiling face forward.
Yes.
Subsequently, of course, we had the wolf warrior diplomacy, we had the militarisation of the South China Sea, we had the social credit system, we had the the genocide of the Uyghurs. We had the crushing of Hong Kong. And now, of course, we've got the almost daily kind of grey zone warfare against Taiwan. So I think, in a sense, that visit to Canberra in 2014 marked, if you like, the high tide of the convergence. And what we've seen since then is a rapid moving apart. So look, knowing what we know now, my government would not have done a trade deal with Beijing. We would not have accepted any nomenclature, even if it's formalistic, because I think in those days China had 11 comprehensive strategic partnerships. But the idea that because of a nasty rhetorical spat with an abrasive US president, Canada is somehow going to be an intimate partner with communist China. I mean, that's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And frankly, it's to the discredit of any country that it would neglect its fundamental interests and values simply because of some kind of a diplomatic spat. Now, I don't want to underestimate the damage that a full-scale trade war could do, but frankly, that's not going to happen, whatever bluff and bluster might sometimes come out of Washington.
So knowing what you know now, and of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney has said a few things. New World Order. He's made his remarks in Davos. Would it be fair to say that this is setting off alarm bells for you to hear this come out of the words of a leader from the Anglosphere?
Look, I absolutely understand why Canadians feel insulted and aggrieved, because talking about Governor Trudeau was probably funny the first time it was said, but the 10th or the 20th time, it's an insult.
Absolutely.
Talking about Canada as the 51st state, again, it's an insult. I mean, occasionally we in Australia joke about New Zealand becoming the 7th state, which would at least improve our rugby team if it happened. But it's obviously a jest. But there was no jest in President Trump's voice when he repeatedly said that Canada should be the 51st state. Well, so I can understand Canadians feeling aggrieved, but again, I make the point, no president is an embodiment of the country. Deep down, there's enormous goodwill by Americans towards Canadians and vice versa. And I just think that all of us have got to be a bit bigger than the current spat. Remember the fundamentals, and also remember that no president is there forever.
Correct.
And anything which is done can be undone, and anything which should be can be restored.
Yeah, governments come and go, so too do leaders. And especially, my view is Canada and US are, because of the lottery of geography, have enduring people-to-people ties. We have people who will work on one side of the border and live on the other. And that doesn't change. And reality is 70% of trade between Canada and, of Canada's economy goes to the US. You can combine every other country, including China, and there's still many multiples of that.
And look, there have been periods of tension. I mean, the 1812 war, obviously.
Yes.
The difficulty after the Civil War, when for a time America cast covetous eyes on British North America. There was the suspension of the trade agreements back in the 1860s.
Sure.
But none of that lasted, and none of that stopped Canada's development as a truly wonderful country with enormous strengths and a great deal of global respect. So I think there's got to be a sense of perspective about this. I mean, one of the problems with the general historical ignorance is that everything that happens is believed to be unprecedented. Well, in fact, there's precedent for almost everything.
Yes.
And this is why the study of history is essential if we are to bring a balanced and sensible approach to the problems of today.
Now, I want to bring it back to China because, we have the benefit of your experience. And one of the things the Prime Minister Carney has talked about was putting in place guardrails as it relates to the recent agreement with China. Is that even possible?
Well, I think there's no doubt that China will always do what is in China's best interests. And at least while it's under the CCP, it will always be absolutely focused on the leading role of the party, east, west, north, south, the party overall.
Yes.
And what we've seen, I think, with contemporary Chinese governance is, if you like, a combination of traditional Chinese exceptionalism with Marxism-Leninism. and if anything, I think that's made China a more difficult neighbour and a more assertive, even belligerent global partner. Now, yes, in the Deng Xiaoping hide your strength and bide your time era, there was a certain cuddliness.
Yeah.
And all credit to Deng Xiaoping and his immediate successors, because they did manage to produce this absolute explosion in wealth with wonderful results for about 500 million Chinese people who were lifted from the third world to the middle class in scarcely a generation. So let's give credit where it's due. But we in the West thought that economic liberalising would inevitably be accompanied by political liberalising. I still think that in the fullness of time that could happen, but the fullness of the time might be 100 years or more.
That's right.
And we've got to deal with China as it is now under the CCP. And I think we just have to accept that the current Beijing government expects every other country, as in the old days of the emperor, to tremble and obey. We had in late 2020 a series of demands, 14 demands issued by the Chinese embassy in Canberra to the Australian government. And they were essentially that we accept all Chinese investment, accept all Chinese immigrants, break the American alliance, and never criticise China. Essentially, we would become a tributary state.
Yeah, a vassal state.
A vassal state. As far as China is concerned, Australia should be an economic colony of China. And regrettably, there are some Australians, particularly people who think that they might make money out of trading with China, who are rather tempted to go along with that. But no self-respecting country can accept that. And we have to remember that we become like those who we associate with. And for all the wonderful strengths of the Chinese people, for all the, I suppose, deep insights of Chinese culture and civilization, there's not the same level of commitment to the great freedoms which, particularly in its English-speaking variant, Western civilization has fostered. And one of the reasons why Beijing is so desperate, obsessive about crushing Taiwan is because Taiwan is living, breathing proof that there is no totalitarian gene in the Chinese DNA.
Correct.
That's why it was so important that Hong Kong's freedoms be snuffed out. I mean, this was a huge economic own goal by the Chinese government, but they were far more interested in making the political point that there could be no variation from the CCP way than they were in maintaining all the advantages that having Hong Kong as a great international city gave them.
And instead, what has happened? You've seen capital flight from Hong Kong to Singapore. And instead, we have this alternative version of people of Chinese heritage in Taiwan thriving under democracy, where the per capita, they are richer now than even Japan.
Exactly right. I mean, within 4 or 5 decades, Taiwan has gone from an impoverished dictatorship to an incredibly successful, vibrant, liberal, pluralist democracy.
Yes.
It's a wonderful example of what can happen when you combine, I suppose, the drive inherent in so many Chinese people with market economics
Yes.
and the rule of law.
And instead of liberalizing and importing that, we've seen instead the Chinese Communist Party exporting authoritarianism to a number of emerging markets. And in democracies like ours, they are interfering. And that's a challenge that we continue to face. Unfortunately, I lived that myself, Tony. My wife, one summer when I was still a member of Parliament, we woke up to posters targeting our family, saying, Kevin supports genocide and other allegations, all along the route that she had walked the night before in the summer.
This was here in Canada.
This was here in Canada, in Toronto. I don't think it was a coincidence that...
So this was effectively agents of the Chinese government doing this in Canada.
Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, our security intelligence don't particularly get back to you about who it is. But we also know the authoritarians all work together. This axis of authoritarians, whether it's the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, with the CCP and others. I don't think it was a coincidence that when I first started speaking out about Chinese foreign interference, that's when I got my first bomb threat. And well, you know, we ended up getting 5, but you know, at that point, once you've gotten 1, what does it matter? You get used to it. But the challenge has been, I think, in Canada in particular, when we're not in the backyard like Australia is getting Canadians to care, and of course, our leaders to take it as seriously as I think we absolutely need to. We still don't have a foreign agent registry, which I know Australia does have. How do you see us navigating that?
Well, I think we've got to be clear-eyed about the whole situation. And when foreign governments with dictatorial governance say that they intend to do harm or intend to dominate others, we've got to take them seriously. Yeah. And this is our difficulty. I touched on it earlier. Our mindset finds it hard to grasp the very different mindset, hard to take seriously the very different mindset that operates in some other countries, and particularly which operates in the leadership of countries which don't have any meaningful rule of law and don't have any meaningful democratic accountability. If they say they are coming for us, we have to assume they mean it.
So we should believe them.
Yeah.
Because I find that we have a tendency to see the world, this is definitely the case in Canada, as we want it to be, as opposed to how it really is.
It is a human tendency. None of us want to hear bad news. None of us want to put things aside for a rainy day. We all want, I suppose, the good times to go on. And look, there is no doubt that for people of my generation in particular, who grew up, I was born in the 1950s, grew up in the 60s, 70s, this has been a wonderful time, best times in human history. And yet the best times will only last if strong people are prepared to make that the case. And I do fear that we've had it so good for so long, we have forgotten that sometimes you do need to do tough things. You do need sometimes to struggle. There is no automaticity in the things we take for granted. Each generation has got to be prepared to learn anew the importance of these things and, if necessary, to be prepared to fight for them.
Speaking of fighting, there are people in Iran right now fighting for their lives, for freedom, for democracy, against the oppression of not only a murderous but incredibly misogynistic regime that is the very antithesis of democratic values. You know, what do you see as the path forward for the Anglosphere? Should there be greater actions in support of the Iranian people?
Well, I was obviously quite buoyed when the American president said that help is on its way. I hope that was not just a throwaway line,
Yeah.
because I think it did encourage people to take to the streets. We do know that hundreds, if not thousands, have been massacred. We do know that thousands have been arrested.
Yes.
We do know that hundreds, if not thousands, have been, if not sentenced to death, at least at risk of death sentences for all sorts of crimes, which shouldn't be crimes. And I think anything that weakens the regime is, in principle, a good thing. So I would personally hope that, having assembled the force that is necessary, the president won't hesitate to use it, not against the Iranian people,
No.
but against the Iranian regime.
Do you think there's a responsibility to protect?
I've always thought that if you can do good things, you should do good things. Now, there are many things that are desirable but impossible.
Yes.
But there are some desirable things that are possible. And yes, if it's possible, it should be done.
Tony, we could go on for a long time, but for our final two questions, I want to bring it back home here to Canada and of course as we look south to the US. If you were Prime Minister today, how would you look to approach engaging with Donald Trump?
Look, that's a good question, and I'm probably lucky that I don't have that challenge. I can remember years and years ago, I was a staffer for the then leader of the opposition in Australia, John Hewson, who had himself been a staffer.
I see.
And John Hewson said to me one evening, he said, when I was a staffer, it always seemed so simple and so clear. Now that I'm actually the leader, it never seems quite so simple or so clear. So I caveat
Yes, of course.
this observation with that hesitation in being too definite about things that I don't actually have to do myself. When I first went into the Oval Office in 2014 with President Obama, I was expecting a pretty tough time because President Obama and I were from opposite sides of the political fence. He was a climate change zealot. I was a climate change realist. And I think I disarmed him because Islamic State had just busted out of northern Syria and was at the gates of Baghdad. And almost everyone who goes in to see the president either has a demand or a complaint. And I thought, I want to be a bit different. So I went in there with an offer to help.
I see.
I said to him, look, Mr. President, I suspect you will want to do something about Islamic State. I want you to know that Australia will be 110% with you in strength. Won't just be token, we'll be there in strength. And so that was a very successful meeting. President Obama and I had our ups and downs subsequently, but nevertheless that was a very successful meeting. I think with any US president, if you appreciate that as the leader of the free world, there's a sense in which he's your president too, the best way is always to go in and say, what can I do to help? Now, there'll be some things he might want that you can't do, like become the 51st state, for instance, or hand over Greenland.
Sure.
But whatever you reasonably can do to be helpful, I think you should do, always conscious of the fact that while the interests and the values of America might very occasionally diverge, there is an overwhelming commonality.
Correct.
And yes, we've got to be true to ourselves as individuals and as nations, but normally that will also mean great solidarity with the United States. So look, I would be eager not to overplay any differences. I would be keen to remind people of the underlying strengths, the underlying communion, and I would do my best not to be too agitated by off-the-cuff remarks from someone who rarely speaks from a script.
Okay. We want to end with a big picture question, especially because you've had the experience of being in the big chair. Yeah. You've been a world leader, and you face making those tough choices. And so at this time, what kind of leadership does the West need if we're to come through this moment and not just to survive, but to thrive?
Well, I think we've got to be at least as full of self-belief as our opponents. And I think we've got to be at least as strong as our opponents. And this is why I think that the very good things that the current president has done include bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities and include snatching the narco-terrorist from Venezuela. And we simply have to be prepared to do these things. For instance, if the British government is ever going to stop the boats across the Channel, it's not going to do it by bribing the French government, because the French government has, if you like, a vested interest in handing its problems on to Britain. It's only going to do it by putting MI6 into some of those camps in northern France, and if needs be, having a few patriotic British tourists on those beaches of northern France to plunge a dagger into those rubber duckies before they take off. I mean, you've just got to get serious. You've just got to get serious. And unfortunately, no British government has taken the problem seriously. It is a peaceful invasion, what's taking place across the English Channel, and no serious government, no serious country can just shrug this off.
No. Yeah, and there have been evidence to suggest that this is the weaponization of migration by some of our adversaries.
I would be confident that 99.9% of the people currently in Calais and elsewhere who are trying to get to England, they just want a better life.
Of course.
But there is absolutely no doubt that there are some people who do see this as part of a long-term strategy to Islamize the West.
Tony, we could go on forever, and I would have, if we did had more time, would have loved to ask you about Operation Sovereign Borders, how you were ahead of your time in what I think is one of the West's larger issues right now, with asylum seekers, the weaponization of migration. You did that hard decision early on in your government. I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us your wisdom.
Well, thank you for calling it that, Kevin.
To our listeners, please like and subscribe, viewers, I suppose. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I can tell you I certainly have. I hope you will, if you want to look up more about that particular operation I referenced, that's Operation Sovereign Borders. Please ensure that you continue to follow and subscribe to all the work that we do here at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. My name is Kevin Vong, and I want to thank again the Right Honourable Tony Abbott.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much.